Thank you, Chairman Luckmeyer, and I want to also thank Ranking Member for organizing this hearing, and thank you, witnesses, for being with us today. I want to start by asking each of you a very quick quick answer. Would you rather live in a world where the U.S. and our allies are financing nuclear projects, or in a world where Russia and China are unilaterally providing lending for nuclear projects?
I'll pick the first answer.
Yeah. The U.S.
Me too.
The second answer.
When U.S. leadership and influence is absent, China and Russia do not hesitate to fill in the vacuum. Unfortunately, U.S. leadership had been absent for way too long in advocating for financing of nuclear projects. While long overdue, I must applaud the Biden administration's recent decision to encourage the World Bank and other institutions to support nuclear financing. We must support all of the above energy strategy. I do want to ask a question. The IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, it has called the nuclear power plants among the safest and most secure facilities in the world. And one analysis of the fossil fuels and low carbon energy sources showed that the risk to human life from accidents and air pollution were so small with nuclear power that they were comparable to renewables. So, Mr. Korsnick and Dr. Reinke, could you help us understand, from an engineering perspective, what makes nuclear so much less of a risk to human health than other energy sources?
I'll start, Ben, and then I'll hand it off to you. Basically, you'll start with there's no emissions from a nuclear power plant. And when we say carbon dioxide, so there's no carbon dioxide emissions, but also no nitrous oxides, no sulfur oxides. And those are some things that are pollutants that damage the environment, but they're also damaging to our health. And none of those emissions occur with the operation of nuclear power. You also get a lot of energy from a small amount of resource in nuclear power, and you get that round-the-clock, reliable energy.
I also want to say that nuclear broadly has adopted safety as its most important single cultural trait. In the United States, safety is paramount. It is the number one thing that all nuclear operators focus on. It's the number one thing we focus on at X Energy as well. Now, we have designed a reactor that is even safer than what we have today, and the reason we care to do that, despite the incredible safety case of today's reactors, is that it makes the reactor design simpler. You can get rid of a lot of things that you would build in and engineer to make sure that a reactor stays safe under all conditions, and that simpler design is then more economic. And so that's why we're bringing a new technology to market. The last thing to say is that we have done an analysis internally as well, trying to look at the overall life cycle emissions for our plants versus what we do, and we use the Argonne National Lab model, which is the standard for the Department of Energy. Typically, that model spits out an answer that is exactly what you said, which is that nuclear is comparable to renewables, and I believe there's only one type of renewable facility that would be, on a per megawatt hour basis, actually less than nuclear power. When we've run that model for our reactors, we actually come out lower than that even.
Thank you. Mr. McMurray, as you discussed in your testimony, the U.S. and over 20 allies pledged to triple global nuclear energy capacity from 2020 levels to 2050. That would be an unprecedented growth, more than 14 new 1,000 megawatt reactors every year starting in 2030. So the US and countries in Europe haven't deployed even close to that pace in recent decades, and some of the countries that made this pledge do not even have nuclear reactors at all. So how important is financing to reaching these levels of deployment, and how can we, the US and IFIs, play a role?
Thank you, Representative. Also, thank you for your support for geothermal permitting reform. Also appreciate that. It's a great question. The U.S. has to lead in this and has the industry to do that. It has the technical expertise and the regulatory expertise to be able to make that happen. It also has the ability to support the financing between XM and DFC, but it's also where the World Bank removing its moratorium is also necessary. Mm-hmm. World Bank's one of the few entities that can support these large global infrastructure projects. And there are things that the World Bank can do. It can create a trust fund, which is actually a well-known thing at the World Bank. It funds about 2/3 of its analytical services are funded by these. And that can solve some
according
of
to World Bank, around half of sub-Saharan Africa still lacks access to electricity. So is it realistic to expect Africa to obtain 100% access to clean electricity unless we expand nuclear energy on the continent?
Thank you. This is an area of the world that wants more energy, and it wants clean energy, and that's where you see China and Russia also looking at deploying their technologies there. That's an area where the U.S. has to be able to compete. Otherwise, these countries are going to look for those sources of financing that's available, and right now that is China and Russia.
Thank you. My time's up. I yield back.